All right. Okay, good afternoon, everyone. We're going to go ahead and get started. And I would like to stop sharing here for a minute so that I can pull up and see everyone. Thank you all for joining us today. This is something we've been trying to do over the last year, is do some expert talks, find some people who we find interesting topics in the industry, and we all get a chance to meet with them from all over the world. So Stratis is actually joining us today from Mexico, and gives us the opportunity to learn about what things are going on everywhere. So this is super exciting for me, and I'd love to welcome you all in today. I'm going to start off by telling you a little bit about Stratis. So he is a diving instructor and explorer, filmmaker, adventurer, storyteller, and he deals with all subjects: extreme weather expeditions, lost days in the wilderness, unique sensitivity to fearless focus. Lots of experience and lots of background that he brings to us. Today, the reason I brought him is he's recently put out a book called Close Calls, and it's a super interesting concept. He reached out to tech divers from really all over the world who have a lot of experience and said, tell me about the time that something went wrong. Tell me about something, would you be willing to share what happened and how you dealt with it? And it's kind of a new concept for me, and it's a new concept for all of us. So that's why he's here today. Today, we are intending this to be a little bit more of a discussion versus him giving us a talk. So I would invite all of you to, at any time, put any questions you might have in the group chat, and I can bring them up, or we'll have some times where if you want to go off mute and say them yourself, that'd be great. So Stratis, if you want to get started by just introducing your book to us, I would appreciate it. Thank you and welcome.
Thank you everyone for making the time, and hi from beautifully wintry Mexico in a sarcastic way. It's nice down here, and I hope everybody's doing well. And thank you for having me on the show. Thank you for having me on the speak. It's nice for me, and I appreciate the time that everybody takes to listen about this book that we put on in last year. So, hi. So basically, the book was originated in 2018. I was making a speech in Eurotech in England, and between speakers, I was at the bar with a fellow Italian diver, and I was just asking him, what are you going to talk about? And he told me, I'm going to talk about this and that, but I'm dreaming one day to have a speech and explain all my mistakes. In that moment, I didn't realize how this will carry on for me, because I thought, like, okay, that sounds like a good idea. Why not? That was 2018. A year after, I was in another conference in Poland, and walking through the various booths, I met with Edoardo Pavia, the Italian deep wreck explorer and filmmaker as well. And we were discussing, like, wow, how come it's a taboo that when people make mistakes, they have to actually not admit it? I mean, it's we just couldn't grasp the reason behind it. And then I realized that one of the biggest reasons, especially when it came to me and my personal reason of why I didn't talk about my close calls, it was not so much that I was ashamed of it, but it was mostly because it was so terrifying that I wanted to completely disconnect that part of my life with my present life. So I wanted it to be like a bad dream that was forgotten and gone. And that worked, except for the fact that it was never gone, because it actually creates trauma, creates drama, and it could reoccur, and it could actually create dangerous situations in much less dangerous conditions, because you become weaker and less ready to respond by suppressing your fear even more. Because in that point, even if you were not afraid of that, you start to become afraid of something like that, because it happened to you, it scared you. And generally, close calls have one characteristics in diving, that normally they tend to be much longer in duration. So for example, I was speaking with a friend of mine who is, we were planning maybe to bring up a second version of the book about mountaineering close calls, and this is exclusive to the show. Nobody knows about it yet. And often the alpinism close calls, they are very brief, like something goes wrong, you slip, you're about to fall, you don't fall, You take a couple of breaths or maybe like 10 minutes, but it's gone. In diving, and especially in cave diving, if you get lost, it could be a very long time before you solve the problem, or if you don't solve the problem. So it kind of builds up this very uncomfortable situation that a close call in diving, and especially in cave or technical diving, prepares you for a very slow pre-death time. And that is terrifying. And for me, it was so terrifying that I wanted to completely remove it from my life and everything. Nobody knew about it. My wife didn't know about it. My mother didn't know about it. I almost forgot about it. So when we started speaking about this in Poland, I said, like, okay, we need to do this because, you know, it's not serving anybody. It's not helping anybody. Christmas came along. The idea got again a little bit more placed on hold because of the holidays, etc. And then the first lockdown in Europe happened, and a lot of free time, a lot of time at home, and thought like, okay, I will do it now. And shyly, I started communicating with people. I thought that they will not respond because I was eventually asking them to admit their weakest moment or their biggest mistake. And generally, professionals don't like to admit that because it's not really the best way to market yourself. But as a surprise to me and to everybody, I got at least a 90+% positive response, very excited, immediate, and openly telling me about the mistake for the mistake, not trying to make it lighter or trying to justify it and everything. It was actually very humbling. It made me change completely my perspective on the industry, which I thought, I still think there is a lot of ego in that, but my personal experience for the book made me see a different aspect that actually pleases me a lot because, you know, it shows me the part of this human that I actually like even more now. And that's it. It's interesting. I don't know whoever of you has seen the book or has the chance to see the book by now. Many of the stories are very. I know the gentleman. Hi, Douglas. And many of these stories are so basic that normally will make sense for any kind of diver. Often I get the question, is this a book for technical divers or cave divers? This is a book about technical divers and cave divers stories mostly, but the mistakes are not. If you analyze the mistake and you go at the core of it, they're mostly bad decisions, they're mostly too much confidence, and this can happen on your advanced open water course. You feel very good because you did a beautiful open water course somewhere with good weather and with a great instructor, and then you go to do your advanced open water course in the snow or in altitude, and you arrive with the wrong attitude, you will put yourself in danger. And so I think everybody can find something to relate from it, and especially the way that it's written. And I salute and thankful once again all the people who wrote that book, because, you know, let's not confuse things. I didn't write this book, I just put it together, but the actual contributors wrote the book. And it was amazing the fact that they wrote it as it was. None of the stories, with no exceptions, was polished or overly decorated with, you know, unnecessary stuff. It was straight to the point. And most of them, when you read them, especially if you have a little experience in the environment that they're describing, you feel like you're living their experience. So that's, I think, is the big victory of this book. And that will be the end of my monologue for the moment.
That's fine. So earlier you showed me a couple of screenshots of the book. Do you want to pull it up again as well? Because some of the photography in this book, for me, I had said earlier, I've done some cavern diving, but not cave diving. But for me, in the cavern diving, I always say I had a customer of mine when I took him on a cavern, and you see that blue looking out and the divers silhouetted. And I had a customer say to me, I feel like I'm diving in a magazine cover. And that's what I think about some of the photography in your book. It feels like we're in a magazine cover. So if you could show us that, that would be amazing. Some of the photography.
Yes, I will. I'm bringing it up now. Just give me 1 second. So I don't know if everybody can see, if it's visible.
I can see.
And another official thank you to Laurent Miruld, which is a very good friend of mine and the photographer of the cover of this picture and of many pictures that are in the book. He's a brilliant photographer from Belgium. All the photography, except maybe for a very, very few cases that material was not available, was requested from the people to be their own photography and about them, of course, and as possibly related to the incident itself. So again, the photography in the book is beautiful, and most of it is because of the actual authors, which again, the book is belonging to them.
Wonderful.
I'm gonna go through the pages like it scrolls down. This is basically the layout, how the book is presented. 1 second. This is a sea cave in Greece, in the Cyclades. And so there is a lot of photography, there is a lot of text, and the reason why I wanted to do that, because it has to do also a little bit with my past, because for 11 years I was editing an art magazine that was very much focused on visuals. So for me, even though I like text, I think pictures help the text to come alive, especially when the people read about something that they don't really know firsthand. This is here the list of the contributors that is participating in the book. There is a foreword by the great Michael Menduno, which I would imagine most people know about, and if they don't, they should definitely look for. He is the reason why we call technical diving, because many years ago, when they needed to divide the two paths between the people who wanted to go deeper than 40 meters and do a little bit more extravagant diving, and what we still call today recreational diving in a way, there was a term that was needed for that, and he borrowed the term technical diving from technical climbing because it was necessary to do it quickly. But I think it works perfectly, and he is also a contributor for In-Depth magazine blog, the GUE blog, and works for Dan in Europe as well, and a wonderful person overall. He explains the whole history behind accident analysis and how important it was for cave diving specifically. So this is a nice part of history and why sometimes close calls or even unfortunately accidents helping long-term the community to become safer. And this is how the book starts. Basically, there is the name and then a description of the contributor and the location of incident, which for me, together with the author and the pictures, help somehow pinpoint a little bit the place where it happened. I also think that it helps that people who know the specific locations to identify the special characteristics of each different location. Of course, this requires you to know the place, but through the story goes like that, and there is a bio at the end of each piece that describes a little bit the history and the whole career of the contributor. And it's written, all the stories are written in first person, because even though we edit them down in order to become what we call book ready, we didn't need to change them very much. It was, most of the material was very well written, including the foreign one. And we wanted to preserve both the color and also the immediate sensation of somebody writing first person. So this is how we kept it. Then we have Alessandra Figari from Mexico and her story. And it keeps going on. Some of the stories are a little longer than others. Philippines. So there is a little bit commercial diving. There is a little bit open water diving. There is a lot of cave diving because this, it was not planned. This just happened to be.
Wonderful. So, can you tell us simply one of the stories, if you're willing to tell us your story, or one of the stories that you thought was intriguing?
Uh, yes, there is many stories that are intriguing for different reasons. For example, Peggy's story is interesting because we all know her, and or at least most people know her and appreciate both her career and her work as a professional photographer and filmmaker, underwater filmmaker. And then the explanation of her mistake, it's something that anybody could do, and actually most of us have done it at some point, voluntarily or not. And she's discussing simply about how she broke her own rule about not using a new piece of equipment on a serious dive, and how this, I have done it, most of us have done it, and we're luckier. And she was lucky at the end, but she had to experience the sensation that maybe that was not going to be a lucky day. And it's nice because the other fear that I had is when I put this book together is that I thought I will read these massive stories about these incredible penetrations in caves and how after 15 days of cave diving, they found a ghost or a dragon, but some of the stories are very, very simple. And that's what makes it even more precious because, we look up at these people and we think that are infallible and, they don't make mistakes. And then not only they do, but they also do mistakes that we might not make because we are more focused on some subjects. So it brings them closer to me personally. So I imagine also to everybody and makes them more human. Therefore, the community gets a better bond. And I think that's what we need in order to, it's nice to have heroes and idols, but it's better when they're closer to you because then you learn better and you don't disassociate your responsibility from their path. So
Completely.
and
So,
she basically had an incident that she was like going on a deep dive. Sorry to interrupt you, Joe.
no.
And she was feeling cold, so she borrowed a heated vest and dove, but didn't consider that it will actually be too tight in her dry suit and in her already undergarment. And on the way up during a long decompression, she realized that this was becoming an issue of not being able to move and not being able to properly do the things that she wanted to do, and even that she was feeling pain during the ascent. And maybe most of us, we will do an ascent that we'll have to stop maybe for 3 minutes or 5 minutes, but she had to do a long decompression that could have resulted in a very uncomfortable situation, and in her eyes, in a close call because she thought that she will pass out. So this is another thing that I wanted to talk about because at some point I was contacted from some of the contributors that they told me what kind of story you want. And for me, it was very clear from the beginning, I'm not going to edit or choose which stories to use. We did not reject any story because for each one of the contributors, that story, it was their close call. And this needs to be respected. And actually, the variety of the degree of seriousness of their close call makes it more interesting because sometimes it's easy to feel like danger. If you're 150 meters under the sea, of course, it's dangerous. But, what about if you are only 6 meters under the sea?
Yeah.
And that makes it more valuable for the general public also. So we didn't ask them why. And I personally respected in the same degree the very, very big stories and the ones that felt more simple. So
Yeah, that's
that was
wonderful.
it.
In fact, one of the questions that did come in said that it was from someone who has read the book. They liked the read, and they said a lot of the close calls could have been avoided by following the basic rules of tech or cave diving. Why do you think they get ignored? Although we're told to strictly follow those rules, they still get ignored.
Well, there is a conducting line for not for all the stories, but for many stories, and this is complacency. That's how you say it, complacency?
Yeah, that's
Okay.
close.
And this happens to everybody. There is a saying that After 100 hours on a rebreather, I know everything. After 200 hours on the rebreather, I don't know nothing. Hopefully, I will make it to 200 hours. So the complacency hits the diver in various degrees with various types of hidden clothes and different personalities through the career. And at least this is coming from personal experience. I felt comfortable, and it's not that you break the rules, but I have broken rules before, trying to justify that we are a team of 4 divers. So if I have only one backup light, going to a cave is acceptable. And I have broken the rules of, like, even if I'm a little too light for some reason, because maybe this is a new undergarment, there is a down line. So worst case scenario, I will hold on it and not come up in the surface. But we shouldn't do that. So I think the same way that I did it, and I'm a conservative diver as a persona. So I think people broke the rules either because of complacency or because sometimes they need to break some rules in order to get somewhere. And even though I wouldn't choose to personally do it, I respect in a way the people who did it, because also this is how some exploration happens. This is how some boundaries are broken, but this does not mean that this is correct diving wise. In their case, diving is just a medium to do something else. Do they dive correctly? Probably that specific day, no, but they're also trained, professional, responsible adults that make choices, and this is the decision. So it's easy to see from outside and say, this was a diving mistake. It's a standard mistake or procedural mistake, etc. But often it's not as easy to predict the smaller things. And sometimes adjustment that needs to happen, like for example, Doug's story. I don't know if Doug is with us and is hearing us still. His adjustment that need to happen in order to avoid his close call. It's easy to see when you read the close call and it's like, okay, you shouldn't have done that. It's the same way that he can see that after. But in the water right there, it depends on the person also. He chose not to do it because he actually followed cave diving formal rules. And that rule almost cost him a bad day. Actually, not. It cost him, not almost cost him, a bad day, even though he followed the rules. So that's the way it is.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Earlier, before we started, you were talking to me about cavern versus cave. I had said that I've done cavern diving, but not cave. Tell me again about, you had talked about cavern versus cave.
I am liking caverns as much as I like caves, and some of the caverns I probably like them even more than caves because it's the presence of the natural light. Here in Mexico especially, it's amazing because it's something that to be honest, I never dove caverns in Florida or in the US, so I wouldn't know how they are. But in Europe, caverns tend to be very, very small, and they tend to be very small parts of a cave system, or generally they are marine caverns that are very small, and they're not really, you don't get the sensation that you are in a proper overhead environment. They might be just, I don't know, 30, 40 feet long, and it's like in the corals or something like that. We don't really have caverns the way that they're defined. Also, I realized that in Mexico, the cavern definition is a little bit different than what we would have in Europe or in the standards of the training agencies, because if for them here, any access to breathable air, even if it's not access to the surface directly, and I'd say this with a question mark because I don't want to make a mistake, because I don't need to differentiate between cavern and cave in my diving, so I ask academically, but I'm not sure. So even if you have access to an open bell of air, that means surface. So as long as you are 40 meters or a certain distance of meters or a certain distance from your gas based on the training agency from that, then it's a cavern. And because of all the cenotes that are connecting one to each other, obviously the definition of cavern is very stretched here.
Sure.
Is it safe with a guide? I personally think it's very safe, because when I first arrived here, this time we did a whole 2 weeks of cavern diving, because it was with a person that was not certified to cave dive. It was actually an advanced open water diver, but in Mexico you can go in a cavern environment with a cavern guide, an official cavern guide, and it felt comfortable and it felt safe, and it felt safe for me that I was there and I was interested of the well-being of this person. So, and the caverns were amazing, because obviously all this daylight that comes through them, it's creating wonderful opportunities for photography, but also it's a beautiful experience. I would not compare them to caverns that I have seen anywhere else so far. So anybody who wants to do cavern diving or wants to enter slowly into the world of cavern and then progressively into cave diving, this is really the place to. A lot of opportunities, a lot of different options, and warm water. So the psychology also is important. It feels safer.
And you are where in Mexico?
Yes, I am in Playa del Carmen, which is in the Yucatan. And yeah, basically there is cenotes walking distance from where we are. So it's nice. Then the cave system here, it's different than everything else that you also have in Europe and most of Florida, because of the navigation. The navigation is very complicated here. On the other side, it's very strictly followed by, everybody follows the same rules more or less. So at the end of the day, if you are trained as a cave diver, it's a very safe environment to cave dive as well.
Wonderful. Okay, so another question came in. What was the closest call in the book? What was the closest call?
I'm not able to answer that because, like I said, this is very personal. Probably a lot of people will tell you it's their story. As a reader, I think everybody will have a different answer. For me, if there will be a story that describes being lost at sea, because it's the biggest nightmare for me, that will immediately go on the top of the list. We don't have one of those close calls, which is interesting that we don't.
Yeah.
And for somebody else, maybe to get lost in the cave will be his or her biggest nightmare. So I don't really know how to identify what's the closest call.
So that leads me to a question. As you get deeper and deeper into technical diving, it becomes more and more of a mental exercise. How much do you think it is mentally getting past fears versus the mechanics of knowing how to do the skills?
Well, as we know from recreational diving as well, stress will lead to panic, and panic will lead to a whole series of problems as well. And we're trying to avoid that in all aspects of life. With the difference is that in the water, and especially in areas that we cannot just call the dive and quickly get to the surface, either because we have a decompression obligation or because we're in a cave, we need to be mentally prepared exactly for what you said, to be able to deal and solve the problem. There is no other choice. Often this comes progressively, and that's why it's very important also the training to be progressive and to build on each level of training also enough experience, not so much for the tribute to everybody who has done it before you. I actually call to everybody who wants to do technical diving or even more cave diving to stop on each level of his or her training and do as much as possible dive at the level that he's trained or she's trained. A, you build experience. B, you enjoy things that you will not really enjoy once you go all the way, because most people will not dive a 30-meter wreck if there is a 100-meter wreck next door and they are certified to dive deeper, because it almost feels to them that it's below their potential. And there is so much nice stuff to see. There is so much nice stuff to see in Cavern. There's so much nice stuff to see in shallow wrecks. So take it easy and build the confidence, because also, even though the mistake has the same solution, or if the problem has the same solution at 100 meters, like 30 meters or 15 meters, pretty much, if you cannot go to the surface, it's the same exact procedure. The psychology is completely different. And I think that the psychological factor, it's something that needs to be evaluated also when certifying divers on all levels, even more when it has this kind of parameter that there is just no way to just call the dive and go on the surface, because it's done in technical diving. It's done mostly in cave diving. That stress situations are simulated, but also depending on the trainer and depending on the training agency, there is more realistic or less realistic simulations. And that's also because this, at the end of the day, is still a hobby. Nobody invents the cure for cancer or anything. So it should be fun, and it should be fun also during training, because whoever has done, and I'm one of them, military style training for diving, it's not a good memory. You don't want to go back. You don't say like, okay, oh, I remember that was a great experience. I learned from that, but I'm glad I'm not there. And that's a pity, because it's still a hobby. And training in diving often it's part of the fun.
Yeah.
So, but the instructor needs to be able to evaluate the psychological potential for a student to deal properly with trouble, and to motivate that the diver will also not get complacent the moment he's done and being certified. And that includes also his previous training, because I see this often. I certify somebody as a cave diver, all of a sudden he is very arrogant diving a shallow wreck. He wants to penetrate the wreck, and he's feeling like it's fine, and he doesn't follow procedures because he has the arrogance from his additional training, especially if he's diving below his training level. And that's a mistake. And the book talks exactly about that. These people are certified and experienced on all levels, and they make basic mistakes, most of them. So
yeah, back to complacency.
This book might be very interesting for educators as well, because they can maybe try to juice out part of this psychological factor and try to feed it to potential students that might have the wrong attitude, and they exist. Unfortunately, they exist.
Yeah. Wonderful. The next question I have for you: what personal learning do you feel you got out of the stories in this book, if any?
Well, like I said, it made me realize, like we were discussing before, that many of the mistakes that I read in the book, I have done them, and I was lucky. So I think I decided that I want to be done with that. So even in the cases that are, and this is a rarity, that I'm diving alone, I will still do a body check. Even if I feel crazy that I'm in the entrance of the cave and I speak by myself to myself, I will deploy my long hose. I will visually say, okay, I have a cutting device on my left arm wrist. I have a backup light in my, and this is also, and in SSI, we do that in technical diving. We will do a equipment verification. This was, for me, it was already existing in SSI when I became an instructor for SSI, but I think it came from so many times students arriving in the classroom and saying, oh, I didn't know I had to bring a second knife, but it's written in your equipment. Yes, but I didn't know it was important. And right now, you fail the class, or you should fail the class if you don't do equipment verification. So we justify it as like, show me that you can access your knife, but eventually covers also the fact of like, did you bring a knife? Mm-hmm. And I have done dives without knives, and I have been trapped in lines without having a knife. And I got away with it many times. So what I want to do is I don't want to have another close call out of something predictable. So this is my lesson to myself, and I hope to everybody who reads the book. most of the divers make mistakes because we have a different life. We don't live 24 hours a day. We're not professional, most of us. So when the day comes, I mean, not long ago, maybe 3 days ago, I was here diving and arrived at the dive site and I had no fins and no masks. And it happens. And I'm glad that I'm here because here there were like another 20 divers. So I borrowed fins and I borrowed a mask. But without fins and without mask, you just cannot go ahead and dive. But I would probably, if I had only one primary light and there was nobody else and I was already dressed and get ready to go in the water, I would probably do the dive before. Now I will have to evaluate more. I'm not sure that I would do the dive or not, but at least I will think about it if I should. And that's a step into becoming safer. That would be my change that I got from that.
That's really great. Just being more conscious, like you say, being aware of that complacency, being aware of it so that you avoid it.
Yeah, and also make a checklist. I think everybody should dive with a checklist regardless of the level that they dive. And it's because we have a different life, a different job. And the moment that we are called to be efficient and semi-professional divers, the ones who are not, we're entering into a sport that is heavily related into equipment, into the condition of equipment. And it's normal. Like we switch on we turn on a switch and then on Sunday morning, we have to become efficient divers, but we haven't dived for 2 weeks or 1 week or a month or after lockdowns. You know, I also suggest people after lockdowns to do a shallow dive and check all equipment because we did it ironically because we had some less experienced divers and almost again, ironically, we had so much equipment failure after 2.5 months of equipment just being in the storage.
Mm-hmm.
So use checklist. I think this is, and the book can make you a whole list of issues that you can add to your checklist, especially if you get to understand what could have caused the incident to materialize.
Absolutely.
There's a lot of things that are related also to filming and making photography, which is lately a very big deal into cave diving, especially. And so do not cave dive and film in a place that you have never been before, even with the guide, because the guide is another person that you don't really, you're not supposed to outsource your safety to something else. And, you know, we dive in teams, but eventually the primary person that we rely on is ourselves. So let's not cut that person off by just giving that person the role of a filmmaker in a new environment. It's really, we have a few stories in the book about that as well.
So along with that, is there one of the questions, are there any close calls in the book that relate to a rebreather failure, meaning technical, mechanical, not user error?
No, because everything is user error. And in the sense that we have a very interesting story, and I don't know if it's this one, I think it might even be this one. Yes, this is the story of Ivan Kovacs, who sent his rebreather with an airline because it's one of those rebreathers that you cannot carry on due to size and shape. And even though he is a professional filmmaker, so therefore he has tons of heavy duty Pelican cases and, you know, they're all made to transport fragile equipment. His equipment had to go through the United States and it was opened by the security. And somehow when they opened it and they closed it, when they put back the rebreather in the case, it was not put properly and it broke. It's just that something that he only found out in the water, not due to lack of checking it, but because it was just, you know, something that couldn't be seen straight away. And is that human error? Yes, but the human in that case is not the diver itself, is the... And imagine that Evan was like, Evan wrote on the box and inside the box that, you know, do not touch. It's apparatus that, you know, is meant for sustaining human life. Be careful. And so he did the right thing, except that he maybe should have maybe done a very shallow, easy dive or, you know, or a pool dive before that. But sometimes when you're on filming projects, you don't have that luxury. So that's why I bring my rebreather with me as a carry-on, and that's the end of it.
Yeah. Are the stories in the book organized in order of like personal, like the stories, the types of stories, or how are they organized?
They're organized alphabetically by the first name.
Mm-hmm.
And this was done because there's no reason behind it. People ask me all the time, why it's the first name? I'm like, I don't know. So
the next question, and I had mentioned it earlier, and several people have mentioned it in the chat room, that this is a new concept for several of us, and this book is hard to get. Can you help us with what is the best way to get this book?
yes, first of all, I apologize for anybody who either found it very hard to get or it took a long time for him or her to get it delivered. And this was due to a combination of reasons. The number one reason it was that initially we wanted to print the book as close as possible to the final reader in order to reduce emissions because of unnecessary shipping, worldwide shipping from one single printing destination. So the only way to do that was to collaborate with an agency that had printing locations around the world. And that sounded good, except that it was a very impersonal company with zero customer service. And basically, more often than not, when something happened, like a book got lost or it was too long for printing, I would just receive no answer. And therefore, by having no answer, I couldn't explain why it was happening. Secondly, we chose to ship with a renowned international shipping provider. And I think they were not prepared properly from their own admission for Brexit. And therefore, all the shipping that was resulting from England, which was most of it, because that was the main base of the book, got blocked because of Brexit complications, custom complications, and we had delays. Even when people were paying premium service delivery, 2 months delivery from England to Europe. And of course, the people were upset because they cannot imagine what is happening. But then we had COVID regulations that stopped all the trucks leaving England to go into Europe. Long story. So in January, seeing all the drama, people being unhappy when the whole point is for them, they just want their book, and we just want them to get their own book. We stopped the printing and we brought all the printing in Greece, which is the country that I'm from, and where I was doing this art magazine that I was mentioning before, and therefore I started printing in there, and now we're using DHL Express worldwide, and I don't want to advertise that, but it's been now a month and a half that we're using them, and we had zero problems and a very quick turnaround. So right now, Europe is like 2 days or 3 days, and Europe to the US, Canada, Mexico, it will be like 4 days to a week. We keep the printing in small batches in order not to avoid to overprint and then waste a lot of unnecessary paper. So we do 100 books every 2 weeks, and then every second Monday we ship all the books that I have been ordering in the last 2 weeks. So if you order on a Friday and the book leaves on Monday and you're in Europe, you get your book in 3 days. If you order on a Monday and the book just left that day, so your worst case scenario is to get it in 25 days. And this, unfortunately, it's just the most easy way to control that everybody gets their book. So again, I apologize for anybody who also, we worked with Amazon or other online providers that they seemed not to have a different problem than I did from the actual printers. So often the book was going on sold out. They were getting big delays in delivery because the US actually is not far from Missouri, the printers. Mm-hmm. The US printing base was asking 30 working days for printing the book. So every new small batch will need 30 working days for printing, which is crazy. It's way too much. So in order to avoid all that, we centralized everything on my website, which is where now you can buy the book. And I personally make sure that everybody gets its book, and you get your tracking number, and it's done the proper way. That if I knew, I would have done from the beginning, but I trusted
Yeah.
I trusted big companies thinking that it would work out. It didn't. So again,
What
I'm sorry for whoever suffered through that.
What about an ebook? Are you planning to release it as an ebook?
We had the ebook when we were working with Amazon, and we stopped doing that because Amazon wanted at the time, and this is unofficial because I got the information through the US printers and not directly from Amazon itself, that they wanted to have exclusivity on the whole. They wanted to be the only one selling it. So I just don't like the idea of exclusivity. And also I don't have personally the structure right now. We're working on it, both for an audiobook and an ebook, but we need to make sure that it's done properly. So the number one difficulty that I have, because I come from a more traditional background of printed material like magazines, books, etc., it was that people who will pay for an ebook, they would not feel funny if then the ebook can be shared easily between other people, so they will pay and anybody else will not pay. So I don't really know how the ebook business works, so I'm open to suggestions as well.
Okay.
But we're working on it.
Okay. So what's next? This book has certainly been driven a lot of interest in our area. What's next for you?
Well, we're looking into another version of close calls that will have to do with mountains, and because this is my other activity in a way, so it will start from trekking and hiking all the way to extreme alpinism, but this is still in the thoughts because we need to make sure. What we avoided with the diving one, it was that we didn't have recurring the same story over and over again. In the mountains, especially for non-familiar with the element people, many of the stories, even though the reason might be different, that storytelling might become similar. So we want to make sure that there is enough material to make up a book that will be at the same importance like the book we did with the diving. That's one thing. Then, like I said, we are thinking into making an audiobook, potentially an audiobook with the actual authors to read their own story, which is very daring as a project. And my partner is telling me that would be great. We can launch it on the 10th anniversary because it's going to take us 10 years to do that. And then there is also a talk with a very big international media group to make a TV series, a docu-TV series that will be available worldwide with selected stories from the book. But this again is in the works, and we are waiting for the next step to materialize.
That's certainly very exciting.
Yes.
Okay, so folks, those are the questions I have in the group chat and the questions I had ahead of time. Does anybody have any further questions? We've got a few minutes left. Or if anybody wants to speak up, if you'd rather speak versus type. We'll wait just a minute.
Yeah, Stratis, thank you so much for taking some time. Hold on, let me get on video for you.
Hi, sure.
No, I'm a full cave diver. I haven't dove in I don't know, 5 years in the cave systems, but before I ever get back in, it's just like you said, you couldn't say it any better. Every dive is a new dive. So I'm excited about the book. I'm about to purchase it, but before I did, I wanted to see, do you ever sign your books?
Apart from the fact that it's uncomfortable for me to sign a book that is not my creation, because like I said, I'm just putting it together, but I will be happily doing it. The only problem that we have is because of my work, I'm away from the place where we ship the book from. So the people who want a book that needs to be signed, then they will have to be patient for when my schedule will bring me back to Greece, and then I will go and sign a bunch of books. I could pre-sign some of them, and that would be a solution, but then it would be very impersonal. So in case we do it, probably will have to be, basically the person who wants a signed book might have to wait longer, that's all. So, and don't rush with purchasing, because we are announcing a special price for the people who are on the show, through the show. If this is still valid, John, I don't know if you...
Yeah,
Yes.
I'm planning to get it signed by a lot of you guys, including I met Ed, I want to say 6 years ago when I was going through my training. So I didn't get to hear his story, but I'm looking forward to reading it. Thank you.
Yes.
Yes,
Thank
and
you.
everyone should hear Stratis generously offered to give a code at the end of this that he'll send to me that I can send to all of you.
Yes. I will actually do it in the weekend. So I think if, I don't know if you have a group or if there's a way that you can communicate the special, you go through the whole procedure, you go through the whole purchase, and then at some point it's asking you for a coupon, and that will be when you enter that coupon for the discount.
Mhm. So I'll put it on Facebook how to get it from me so that you can get a hold of me.
Great. And I'm sorry again for my English is not my primary language, so I hope this was not too exotic.
For not being your primary language, you rock starred the language.
Okay.
So there's multiple people are doing greetings in the chat and saying thank you, well done, impressive. Every contributor setting aside their ego to help others realize their mistakes is a huge takeaway. So lots of really great greetings for you, Stratis, in the comments.
I'm with you guys. I thank you to all the contributors and thank you to the whole community. Also, another thing I forgot to mention, which I'm sorry, but I think it's important to talk about it, is that 50% of the profit of the book goes to the Dan Foundation. And at the 1 year anniversary, we're gonna do an open presentation of this profit that goes to Dan, and it goes into they have a charity fund that has an impossible Austrian name to pronounce, so it's Klaus something. I am sorry to Dan and to the person, but I'm bad with names. And basically, it's going to be help for all the families of divers who unfortunately did not have the luck to have a close call, but have a fatality or a disability. And therefore, the family is finding it hard to cope because the person who was hurt was the provider of the family. So this is what Dan is doing. And I think this is a wonderful way to give part of the profit back to the community. And Dan is our partner in that. So thank also Christian Pellegrini and Signor Marone also for that. And that's it. This we didn't mention that, and I think it's important to mention that. I would like also to thank Eduardo Pavia, Michael Menduno for putting all the hours and the time to help me through this book, and of course, again, the contributors and the buyers.
Wonderful. Well, thank you everyone for joining us today. This has been a really fun talk for me and very interesting. And thank you, Stratis, for giving us your time. I didn't know where in the world you were going to be today. And so giving us the time, we really appreciate it. Thank you.
No problem. It's my pleasure. Thank you. Safe diving to everybody, and have a wonderful year.
Yeah. Have a wonderful year diving, folks. Bye. Stratis, before you log off, you might pull up the group chat because there's a lot of nice notes for you.